first webinar on the future of the European institutions. I'm Elena Spaventa, Professor of EU Law at Bocconi, and I'm here in my capacity also as a member of the Managing Council of the Institute of European Policy Making, which is hosting this event. And I say hello to our director, Daniel Gross, who I see there. YEP is a think tank which seeks to combine the depth of knowledge and expertise of academia and the policy impact of more traditional think tanks. And today, I think, is an excellent example of this effort. Please do sign up to our newsletter to keep up to date with our events generally and with the other webinars in this series in particular. And we already have scheduled 2 webinars, one with Professor Ferreira and one with Professor X on the European Commission and the European Parliament, respectively. Now, today marks the 67th year anniversary of the signing in Rome of the European Economic Community Treaty and the Euratom treaties, the original treaties that started the process of European integration. In my mind, there is no doubt that the success of the integration process depended in large part from the creation of an institutional structure that went much beyond what was and is usual in international relations, in particular with reference to the truly revolutionary role of the European Commission and the Court of Justice of the European Union. With time, the role and functioning of the EU institutions changed significantly. The European Parliament became a directly elected body in 1979 and has become a co-legislature in almost all fields of action of the European Union. It has acquired significant powers in relation to both the budget and the European Commission. The voting for the Council of Ministers has changed, and in most areas we have got rid of unanimity in favor of qualified majority voting. And the European Council has been given a formalized role in the Treaty of Lisbon. But as it is always the case, formal changes are just a very small part of the changes that occur in the functioning of any organization, whether it is a local, national, supranational, or international. And as important, if not more important, surely more important for those of us who study the dynamics of European integration, are the changes in the practice of the institutions that determine both the way they work and the powers they assert. And in the past 15 years or so, the EU institutions have changed their role in a significant way. And this series of webinars seeks to critically examine those changes and especially their significance for the integration process. Now we start today with a discussion, with a general discussion with the 3 most eminent speakers, and I thank you very much for accepting our invitation. Those speakers do not need an introduction. President Amato is President Emeritus of the Constitutional Court, as well as a former Prime Minister, Home Secretary, Minister for the Treasury. And very relevant to us, and especially to me, because I'm interested in these dynamics, he was Vice President of the convention that drafted the European Constitution, which was the blueprint for the Treaty of Lisbon. Sylvie Goulard is a Vice President of the YEP and the President of the Deutsch-Französisches Institute. Ms. Goulard has been involved in both national and European policymaking, having been Minister for Defense, Deputy Governor of the Banque de France, as well as MEP and political advisor to Romano Prodi when he was President of the Commission. And last, but of course not least, President Mario Monti, who is our honorary president for the Institute of European Policymaking, former Prime Minister, former Commissioner twice, as well as former Rector and President of the Bocconi University, and a member of the Italian Senate. I will now leave the floor to the speakers. Our format is fairly, let's say, informal, in that our speakers will introduce the topic for about 15 to 20 minutes each, and then we will allow some questions from the floor. And Giuliano, thank you very much for being with us, and I leave you the floor.
Well, thank you, Eleanor, for inviting me. And the topic is really interesting nowadays because there are some innovations, in my view, and there are limits and doubts on their, let's say, permanence for the future. Certainly, I have been impressed by the difference of the last crisis, the post-COVID crisis, vis-à-vis the previous one. All of us have Jean Monnet in mind and his expectation that progress in the process of integration always connected to crisis that shape the future destiny of Europe. Now, we don't have the time to return deeply into the financial crisis of the first decade of the century, but something that impressed me at the time, that despite the changes, it was not innovative at all in the overall structure of the governance of the Union as it had been shaped before. We were well aware at the time that we relied on a community method on the one side, and that the intergovernmental coordination had been taking over throughout the years. We could expect that a crisis like the financial one could strengthen the community method because of the European relevance of the problems, financial stability of the member states, financial stability of the banks, etc. But on the whole, despite the role that the Commission had, the supervision on national budgets, what impressed me, I must tell you, is that the new instrument that was the European Stability Mechanism was substantially built upon an intergovernmental approach and governance. The board of this mechanism was conceived in terms of national ministers there taking the community decision. And no less important, it was adopted, like other devices of the time, by intergovernmental agreement and not by applying this or that clause of the treaty. So somehow doing something new, but relying on national governments and their instruments of coordination. The post-COVID crisis has given us something completely different. And you know why it is completely different? Because it's not communitarian and it's not intergovernmental. In the past, when we wanted more integration in areas where we had member states coordinations, we had transferred the topic from the intergovernmental to the communitarian. Think of the third pillar of Maastricht, of the justice and home affair items. Several of them in time passed to the community method. Think of the Next Generation EU, but think also after that to the Social Climate Fund that will be used for the fifth for 50%, etc. Here you have a new, really a new method, which is neither communitarian nor intergovernmental, is truly multi-level. And in the same procedures, you have the Council with its usual role, priorities, objectives, the member states with their national projects, the Commission. I have defined it, writing about this, as a sort of hub where the project arrives, where the final decision, this is extremely important, on the projects is taken, and then the resources go to member states, and again, the surveillance on the implementation is of the Commission. So this is really something new. This is giving the Commission a role that the intergovernmental method had somehow eroded and destroyed. You remember, several of us wrote at the time, in the intergovernmental method, the Commission is becoming a sort of general secretariat of the Council, not the institution that embodies the European interest and that has the final word on what is European. Now the Commission is getting this role. All of us experts in federal tools remember that the United States federal government grew throughout a similar device, grants in aid. After the New Deal, grants in aid became the instrument by which the federal government succeeded in somehow creating common principles in areas that were under the jurisdiction of the member states. Using what? What we have discovered now, spending conditionalities. The money is mine, and I can impose upon you conditionalities on the use of this money in areas that fall under your jurisdiction. In my view, this is a system that has a future. And this might be our solution for the future, that in a context like the European one, where member states are strong entities, like it or not, are strong entities for their rules, for their traditions, for their powers, for their political links, whatever. I don't enter into it. Probably the process of integration that has entered into this new dimension of multi-level governance has found something that might grow in the future. The obstacles. The first obstacle is in the legal basis upon which we have built the post-COVID experience. Article 122 is not the basis for permanent innovations, is these exceptional circumstances and conditions that explain that you do something now, but this is here as it is, but for the future it does not remain. We know that stabilizing common debt, future common resources similar to this one, implies something new, and implies, in my view, reforms of the treaty in the articles having to do with the budget, namely Article 312. All of us know that we are in a situation now that the Bundesverfassungsgericht could not allow to happen in Germany, as we well know, because the debt is the unknown reason by which there are interest rates in the common budget. And I don't go further into this. So stabilizing what we have done implies something that has to be changed in the treaties. But this is something that could happen. The more we are convinced that there are common goods that have to be produced at the European level, the more the pressure for stabilizing something that is now based on the exceptional 122 will be more feasible. Let me say a final word on one of the obstacles that I see to this stabilization, and it is for the Italians to take note of it. All of us are aware of the discussions that are going on in the European Council and surrounding on the future of common defense. And like it or not, yesterday, not 2 days ago, Germany and the Netherlands said no to common resources for these matters. I don't enter into the confusion of this defense thing because it's not clear to me what has to be common at the moment. The industry, which would be very much useful, or already troops, organized military forces, etc. These are very different things. And I wouldn't underestimate the fact that an integration already exists in NATO, which is not easy to reproduce at other levels. But reflect on this thing. There are unaccomplished goals in our European process of integration. Think of the banking union, think of the capital market union, think now of these initial projects on defense that find an obstacle, and the obstacle is the debt of the countries like Italy that somehow is seen by other countries as a warning about the risk of anything that might imply a burden sharing, because the sharing is seen by the others as something that one day could imply that they have to pay for those who are not in a condition to withstand the burden of the ensemble. We are an obstacle. We have to accept this fact. We can't say that we are more European than others when it is our debt, the obstacle for the others is to accept the common solution. If I can be brutal, I would say that being more European than others with their money is something that the others are not ready to accept. Now, I'm one of those who try to convince also German friends, don't worry. The next generation EU will be repaid by each of the member states, etc. There are no clauses in it that imply that you will pay for us. But this is the first question that comes to their mind. Will we pay for the Italians at the end of this process? We are not ready to do it. And so the process of integration remains somehow half of its way. So while we have all the elements that suggest that the process of integration can be moved, can become closer and closer throughout this new multi-level path that by pragmatic reasons we have eventually envisaged, there are old reasons by which this can't perhaps be accomplished as it deserves. We Italians should reflect on this, and I leave it here.
Thank you very much, Giuliano. There would be quite a lot to discuss already, but I think we agreed that we would hear the three panelists one after the other, and then we open the floor to discussion. So I'm not so sure if Sylvie Goulard wants...
I am here. I can hear you, and you cannot see me, unfortunately, for technical reasons. I don't know why, but can you hear me well?
Yeah.
We can.
I can hear you, Sylvie.
If I'm just a speaker and nothing more, a voice speaking.
Yes, I think that's fine. I think we'll proceed if, unfortunately, because, but, you know.
We tried. I'm very sorry, but I did not manage. So thank you very much for inviting me. I'm so glad to be again, to be in such a prestigious panel and to discuss again with Giuliano Amato and Mario Monti. Giuliano Amato was at the convention. I was a very minor person assisting Romano Prodi, but it was a nice face. No, I just, because to make it more interactive, I fully agree with your last point, Giuliano, and I fear it's not only Italy. France is also the country that is not helping because of the management of the public debt and the public deficit. And it's a pity that we have reached this point, which does not make us very credible, even if the proposals made and the necessity of having new fields of cooperation are obvious. But let me go back to what I wanted to say. So my first point is that for me, all discussions on institutions should not be seen as an exercise for lawyers and political scientists. The main indicator of success is to see if we have the European citizens on board or not. Institutions are made for people to believe that they are living in a democratic space and that they have a say and they can control. And unfortunately, and this is my main concern, it is not new. I was already concerned 20 years ago by the level of participation at the European elections. And now if you see not only the risk for participation, but also the increasing weight of the parties that are not pro-European and even proposing very nationalist programs. As far as my country is concerned, the polls are showing Le Rassemblement National around 30-31%, and there is another party from the same family. This is really the case because it's the niece of Marine Le Pen who could get 6 or 7. She could get 6 or 7%. So in one of the founding countries, you have quite 36 or 37 percent of the population ready not to vote for anyone within the framework proposing something, which is for me something we have to face, and we should stop being complacent and discussing as if everything was right. My first point in this perspective of the citizens is that it's not a surprise because the evolution of the institutions, as Giuliano Amato said, is less commission less collegiality at the supranational level, less perception of a supranational body having in mind the interest of everyone, and much more a battle between states. And the role taken by the European Council in the financial crisis, in the sanitary crisis, going beyond what the Treaty of Lisbon is foreseeing for this body is, in my eyes, the main problem. But I will leave it also to Mario Monti, who was a member. But from my more modest point of view, we should not be surprised that people have lost their faith in Europe when what is called Europe is actually a battlefield between national governments trying to go back from Brussels with more and more advantages for them and less constraints. So this is really sad, and I have the feeling that we are in an Orwellian process where first we unfortunately made the word community disappear with the Lisbon Treaty, and then we use the word Europe more and more, even when there is no Europe, actually. So the use of the word seems to me something very, a good indicator of the way we are going along. Second point, on the words. So the institutions have evolved, less commission, less collegiality, and more European Council. And we observed very concrete examples that this year, the last mandate was the first time where you had, after a trialogue, governments coming back, even if the Council and the Parliament had agreed on some decision. And in this context, we observe more and more speeches and more actions presented as European. The speeches in the direction of geopolitical union, capacity to resist to Vladimir Putin, playing a role worldwide, etc., with a budget that it is obviously not adapted. And on this, again, it was said a little bit by Giuliano, but Mario Monti knows a lot on that. And the decision-making process is not adapted, obviously, for crisis management, speedy reaction. And I will take only one very sad example. The European taxpayers paid all the infrastructures in Gaza. We all condemn, of course, the terrorist attack of October 7. It was something no one can support. But on the other hand, we are not able to have a position where children are dying because they don't receive food and water in the Gaza Strip. So Europe was in the middle of the process as a payer and is no more capable of being there. And my third point will be on enlargement and the decision taken in December. The European Council, without any debate as usual, took a major decision, which is to open the door, even for very good reasons. I'm not discussing the reasons, to Ukraine, Moldavia, Georgia, and all Balkan states. One can be happy that we open a perspective to these countries, but if you look carefully at the text of the European Council in December, you will discover that firstly, they tell us that there is a parallel process on reforming the EU, but the decision on enlargement is taken. The reform is nowhere. We have no blueprint, or at least at the date the decision was taken. And even if the Commission proposed some elements recently, there is no agreement. There is no platform between, let's say, a certain amount of member states representing a certain amount of population to say, this is the direction we want, this is the direction we are choosing, this is the way we are doing this. And I don't like to use the word vision, because I would like the German word, it's ein Gesamtkonzept. It means something much more concrete. How do you shape the whole with the budget, the policies, the institutions, in order to make sure that this enlarged union can continue to thrive and to deliver all the things we ask it to deliver, which is stability and protection against aggression and a strong single market, etc., etc. So we don't have the Gesamtkonzept, if I may say so, and we don't have the roadmap, the Stufenplan, the Germans would say, the roadmap with the different steps. Nothing is going to happen within some weeks, but we could begin to elaborate a roadmap with different steps. And I'm very worried to hear that in the proposals made by the Commission, the great idea seems to be that we could have a step-by-step accession to the EU. And here I must confess, I must be old and stubborn, but I don't know what they are talking about. Because if you do step-by-step accession, you leave many questions open. The first one, I come back to my citizens. When I was member of the parliament, I used to always try to imagine, can I explain this decision in a bar in the south of France where I come from? And this is the test, in my opinion, they cannot pass. If you cannot tell if a country is in or out, if you cannot tell if it has rights and duties, you are lost on a marketplace or in a bar in any town or city of Europe. So there is a risk of being too complex, unclear, and to dilute the feeling of belonging. The second point is that for me, there is a big question on democracy. Can we accept that someone is joining the single market without having members elected in the parliament to conceive and adopt the rules, and without a judge at the Court of Justice? What does it mean for the quality of the product crossing the borders, for the consumers' protection, for the free movement of people, etc., etc.? So many things are intertwined in the European Union, and the position we took during the Brexit negotiation, which was no cherry picking, no slicing. We keep the coherence of the single market. We link the single market with the Court of Justice, was, in my opinion, the right position. It can seem a little bit rigid and less creative than a step-by-step accession, but for companies and for citizens, at least it gives a clear idea of who is in, who is out, and who is having rights and duty and who is not. So I conclude on one point. Some people could say, well, don't exaggerate, defense is not something we ever put under the umbrella of the community method. We can do it intergovernmental, etc., etc. I'm a little bit puzzled, because at the end, defense is the field where we could have, or we could try to have, the highest credibility, the best possible decision-making process, and the deepest accountability. Because at the end, it is about life and death. It is about the soldiers you send on the ground, or the bombs you use, the drones or whatever. It is something going deeper. So I stop here, but I would say that the fact that defense is at the top of the priority right now, and it is rightly so because of the threats, should not make us less ambitious. For the monetary union, we did not accept just to have a basket of currencies. We created the euro. And it is right, and rightly so, because if we would have just had a basket of currencies, we would not have gone through the financial crisis. So that is my modest contribution to a complex debate, and thank you for listening to me. Bye-bye. I listen to you.
Thank you very much, Sylvie. And now I would proceed directly to President Monti for his thoughts, so that then we can have a discussion.
Thank you very much, Eleanor. I'm delighted to take part in this stellar panel, which may indeed bring us to see some light. Let me first make two comments on things that my predecessors have said. And then I will focus more on the European Council, if I may. I'm rather attracted, it happens rather frequently to me, by something that Giuliano Amato said about multi-level governance of the EU. And he explained how money with conditionality in the current conditions is a lever to develop multi-level governance. I would, at the same time, call for greater attention than has been provided so far to the downwards dimension of finding at each historical moment an optimal multi-level governance. I think it is hugely important for the EU to find from time to time policies or segments of policies which become mature to be performed at the national level, whereas they were born at the community level, and transfer them downwards with a series of caveats. Giuliano knows, as well as I do, the experience in the field of competition with the introduction effective more or less exactly 20 years ago of the so-called modernization in competition policy, that is many cases to be assessed under competition law, where ever since 1958, traveling to Brussels, because Brussels, the European Commission, was the only place in Europe that could decide whether or not a given agreement between companies contained illicit elements on the basis of competition law. That was natural at that time, because when we started our venture in 1958, there were 6 member states. Only one of them had since that very day, January 1st, so no previous experience, Germany and national competition authorities. All the others were in the desert from that point of view. But now I think it is very much appreciated, and the experiment, I'm told, functions smoothly, that the national competition authorities have been really deeply involved in a governance by network. And I believe that also politically, each time that we can show that such a thing is possible and is done, that's a point that creates some space for more concentration at the higher level when it is badly necessary. And of course, most of that will come in the future from the recognition of public goods. I would like also to pick up from Sylvie in this case some limitations of the role of the Council, in particular the European Council, in this evolving structure of effective governance. It was in fact Sylvie who drew to my attention some time ago a famous, but maybe we should call it slightly infamous, speech of Angela Merkel at the Collège d'Europe in Bruges in 2010, where she invented, with a lot of coherence, as Germans tend to do, the union method as a possible substitute to the community method in many cases. Maybe she was looking ahead to the need that national governments should disburse their money to cope with the financial crisis that would erupt very soon in the Eurozone. But certainly that was, I think, the philosophical underpinning to an undermining of the community method, which Germany itself had the greatest merit with France at the time to put in the very building blocks of the European Union. Now, about the European Council, of course, Giuliano Amato had a seat there longer than I did, but maybe my experience is more recent. To put it bluntly, I believe that the European Council does things that it was not supposed to do.
No.
And does not do things
that it was supposed to do.
It was. Even before the Lisbon Treaty, if we go to the parents of the European Council, Valéry Giscard d'Estaing and Helmut Schmidt, well, it was clear from their approach that this new body, not foreseen in the legal apparatus of Europe at that time, was created to provide strategic guidance to this collection of...
This is what the treaty says.
Exactly. And now, exactly, the Lisbon Treaty, what does it say? The European Council is there to provide the Union with the, I quote, impetus necessary for its development, and defining the, I quote, general political directions and priorities.
That's it.
And it is made,
Yes.
and it is made clear that the European Council is definitely not there for any legislative function. Now, my impression, but I am neither a lawyer nor a constitutional lawyer. I'm nothing, but I have been there a few times at a critical moment. My impression is that the strategic guidance during the Eurozone crisis was totally absent. I mentioned sometimes an example, not because I was involved in it, but because I think it was strictly necessary to do that. When in 2012, I asked bilaterally the then president of the European Council, Herman Van Rompuy, whether it would not be a good idea at a time when in different modalities with different names, but anti-European populist movements were cropping up, whether it would not be a good idea to devote a special session of the European Council without the anxiety of reaching by the end of the day a decision on Greece or Cyprus or Italy, but a well-prepared discussion among the heads of states and governments of whether this mounting populism has or has not something to do with the EU policies, with the way in which they are presented, and so on. Find me at that time a more strategic aspect than that. Well, President Van Rompuy was pretty enthusiastic. And of course, he called the following day Angela Merkel, who the following day called me to say, you had a very good idea. But I said to Herman, and I say to you, I would be more supportive if we could wait for the financial crisis to be conclusively over. And then why not? We might open a reflection of that type. To my knowledge, there has never been this reflection at the level of the European Council. At the same time, the Council does meddle with things that are quasi-legislative, because it takes orientations in its conclusions that do condition very much the pursuit of legal legislative dossier. And all this is a problem that is compounded by the fact that, very wrongly in my view, the Commission, the commissioners feel at a remotely second place relative to the European Council. I must say, when I was there, even though I was politically speaking, a non-entity, I thought that the Commission did something that was not less important than the European Council, and that it had a clear mandate. And there were a few cases in the field of competition where we stuck to our orientation in spite of strong calls by the European Council not to go ahead. I'm not sure that today this is the rule. I think it is an exception. And the combination of all these aspects leads me to suggest also to the IEP, to the Institute for European Policy Making, putting together the minds of historians, lawyers, economists, and practitioners to do some really deep study on the European Council. For example, what could be a very, very minimalistic suggestion, no change in treaty, of course, but can a body like that one exist without a small code of conduct? The behavior of members of the European Council is indecently nationalistic in substance, but also in the form of their participation to that body, and also in communication out of that body when they run to their national press conferences, even before the President of the European Council has clarified in a European perspective what decision has been adopted. So I think the time has come to consider the European Council as a necessary entity, first of all, because it is there, but without inferiority complexes by other, not less legitimately important bodies of the European construction. And if Daniel allows me, I don't know whether there was already an announcement of the first annual event that the IEP will be holding, which is, I think, on the 14th of October. And correct me, Daniel, and I think that there will be three main topics to discuss. One of them being on the European Council, and its first president, Herman Van Rompuy, has been kind enough to accept to participate. And I hope this could be the beginning of a concrete, creative, and non-theological consideration of this all-important topic.
Can I just say many thanks to Mario Monti for his impromptu publicity for our event later in October this year. And as you rightly observed, Mario, this will be an occasion to discuss the role of the EU institutions and, of course, particularly the European Council. And Elena Spaventa will, of course, make important contributions herself as well. Many thanks.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for the speakers. And of course, as a lawyer, Mario, I'm always very happy when someone says, let's write down the rules. I mean, what happened in the UK for not writing down rules is all too evident as a disaster in making. Now, I would like to thank all the speakers. I think this was really exceptionally interesting, and would like to allow the audience to make to intervene through questions or remarks. We ask that you do so through the chat so that we can moderate a bit also, because we have a very large audience. Now, in the meanwhile, I was wondering between the three contributions that I found really very interesting. Sylvie talked a bit about the democratic deficit, but we didn't focus at all on the role of the European Parliament as legitimizing EU policy making. And I was wondering, and we have seen that in Next Generation EU, what Giuliano was saying about the multi-level governance. Again, that multi-level governance has come at the expense of the powers of the European Parliament, because it had to agree to it, but it's not really properly represented in the governance. And equally, the role of the European Council, this super turbo role, also comes at the expense, of course, of the Commission, but also at the expense of the European Parliament. Now, the Council conclusions of December 2020 are an example of that, because they basically clearly stated, the longest conclusions I think ever written, clearly stated what was going to happen, and therefore left a very small role for the objection of the European Parliament. I think the only significant contribution that the European Parliament could make at that time was to insist that the budget for Horizon 2020 was not going to be cut as an effect of Next Generation EU. So I was wondering whether the panel had some views about the European Parliament, especially important given that it's the elections are looming, and we hope to see meaningful participation, not only from the Eurosceptic wing of the voting population.
I have an answer, but I will speak later on. Let us, the audience, have a word.
I have a short question for Giuliano Amato regarding the debt problem. I agree with you about what you said about the worry that our partners have about the Italian huge public debt. However, I wonder whether we should not worry also about the extreme dogmatic reluctance of the Germans about any type of debt whatsoever. I mean, this obsession with Schwarze Null, even domestically, it's something that is a negative counterpart as regards or compared to the positive counterpart of our huge debt. How can you discuss about making public debt at the EU level with interlocutors that are dogmatic about the fact that, as it goes in German, making debt is being guilty. Schuld means guilt, right, in Germany. The second is the second question or comment is to Sylvie Goulart. I totally agree about the key importance of speaking to the citizens. And in this respect, I think that in order to speak to citizens, we do need visions, not just Gesamtkonzepten, because the latter are, bound to be rather technical because they are used for intergovernmental or bureaucratic coordination. While when you talk to the people, you have to be simple, and there is no way in which you can explain to the people anything about the EU if you enter into the details, because it's a very complex polity, is a very complex political system, and it's not reducible. It would be misleading to reduce it to a yes or no item. So you need a vision, and the vision is something much wider. And what is a good sign, and I finish here, is that if you read the party platforms of the of the European party federations, now this time, for the first time, I sense that parties are being able to forge distinctive visions. It's not just the usual blah blah about European values or being pro-Europe or against Europe. It's, if you compare, for example, the platform of the populars with the platform of the socialists, you see two different visions. They are both pro-European, but they want different emphasis. They place different emphasis. And this is, I think, a good way of, connecting the European Union with citizens by presenting them alternatives, relatively simple, but informative and grounded alternatives. And this is the way to go, I think.
Okay, so thank you very much. I would have a quick reaction to Professor Ferrera's comments, and then we'll take other questions.
Reactions by the initial speakers, you mean?
Yeah, by you, Sylvie, and...
Now, very shortly, Maurizio, all of us are aware of the love of the Germans for the debt, and therefore, even though their internal conflicts demonstrate that at least between the government and the Bundesverfassungsgericht there is some difference. But having said so, I would say I wouldn't reduce my responsibility due to that reason. Let us have, all of us, that's below 100%, not necessarily at 60, but below 100% and stable under that level. The discussion with the Germans would be much easier. And my strength in saying there are common goods that have to be produced at the European level, in relation to which national aids create a fragmentation that reduces enormously the impact of the innovations, and therefore we also need common debt. At that point, I would be stronger in doing this. They could not rely on that non-said that remains the main reason, I think, for their no. And if I may use this turn also to give a short reply to Eleanor's initial remark, I have nothing against the different procedure of these spending conditionalities procedures that might more directly involve the parliament. What I know is that parliaments have inherent powers that are supposed to use to interfere with what the executives, whatever, are planning and doing. In its initial life, the European Parliament, directly elected, found the way of the inherent powers to increase its own role, as all of us know. So, by only giving the parliament the right to be informed and to vote upon the information it has received from the executive on whatever, we have opened for the parliament a highway. They have to use it. They can interfere with whatever they want in relation to the Next Generation EU and to the national plans. If they learn how to use, or perhaps they have forgotten how to use their prerogatives, but they do exist. Allow me
I have lost Julian. I don't know if do other people, have we all lost?
Yeah, everyone.
Okay, great. Sorry for that. We're having a few problems, technical problems today, but I think what Giuliano was saying was quite clear already. And I was wondering whether Mario Silvi had any comments on Professor Ferrera's intervention.
Eleanor, as far as I'm concerned, I followed with great interest what Maurizio had to say. I was not receiving any specific question or comment, so in the interest of time, let me pass.
Yep. Silvi, because otherwise I would move on with the questions because we have sorry.
President Amato, you should now be able to unmute yourself.
And Sylvie also has been cut out. She cannot open her mic. So I say this to the team. But maybe we go to the question. We have quite a few. Welcome back, Giuliano.
I'm here.
Sorry for that.
And me too.
And please.
May I answer to Mr. Ferreira? Ferreira, may I?
But who's speaking, Sylvie?
Yes.
Yes, may I or not?
Sylvie is asking whether she may speak. I suppose she may.
Of course.
Okay.
Can't you hear her?
Okay, so then I try. Now, what I want to say first of all, I really believe, like Giuliano, that we should reduce our debt. It's too easy to say that the others are rigid when we have been violating our own commitment for 30 years. We have been ignoring the commitments we took at treaty level, in the Stability and Growth Pact, etc., etc. And on the question that was more directly for me, you know what? We don't need to speak to the citizens. First of all, I wrote L'Europe pour les nuls, Europe for dummies, and I think we can explain. But the question is not to explain or communicate. The question is accountability. Are we choosing the people who are ruling Europe for us? The answer is even less true now than it was before. Ursula von der Leyen is not a candidate to the European Parliament. Nicola Schmidt is not a candidate. Renew has 3. So it's getting ridiculous if we don't have any link between the European Commission's election and the choice of the president and the elections. And furthermore, it is a matter of accountability. The European Parliament cannot control, to take a very concrete example, all expenditures made in the so-called peace facility, which is used to finance war. So we have billions put in the name of Europe in the pot by member states without any control. So it's not about explaining to citizens, it's to take them seriously, to involve them. If I may, it's like a little bit like women. No? We just don't want that people explain us something. We want to be actively participating in the democratic life of Europe. And this is unfortunately not really the case. We are observing 27 campaigns with national arguments, at least in France. It's all about pro or against Macron, pro or against Mrs. Le Pen. The truly European topics are not discussed. But I stop here, I don't want to be too long.
Thank you very much. And I'm happy to say that I also was kicked out of this meeting just 5 minutes ago. So we're having real technical faults. Now I would proceed with the question. I tried to unify one or two. There is some interest on the role of the Commission as to whether it should can still be technocratic or political, and whether its role in the in assessing conditionality implies some sort of a competence creep for the Commission. So again, I would go around the speakers, maybe starting this time with Mario on.
Yes, I think that the more the Commission becomes political, the more it becomes difficult to say that its decisions in the enforcement aspects of its activity are non-political. What I think would be a good way to pursue is that the Commission be highly political as the engine of the Union in its legislative and other proposals, but perhaps without reminding the world each day that now this is a political commission, because it denotes such a complex of not being considered political that could well lead those who are involved in its enforcement decisions to wonder whether it is really based on. Now, there is a solution to this. Giuliano Amato, many years ago, had proposed that, for example, for the competition enforcement, an autonomous entity should replace the Commission. When I was commissioner, I devoted time and passion to put Giuliano on the other side, and at least he desisted from his call for a separate body. That I did not just because I was in the Commission at that time, but because I think a lot would be lost if competition were to go into another building in Brussels or in another city, and so without any influence, which now is very much used, of the competition commissioner to make the case for at least reducing any anti-competitive distortions that unwillingly the rest of the Commission may put into proposals for directives and regulations, etc. So it's a dilemma. It's not clear, but certainly when President Juncker nicely comes up in Paris, asked about France and Stability Pact, and said brilliantly, la France est un grand pays, comment peut-on la mettre en procédure d'infraction? That does not help very much.
It doesn't. Can I follow up on that? Just a quick question from me. Is one thing about the competition powers, and I know that it has been discussed, but I think I was wondering whether any of you other thoughts about the power of the Commission to bring infringement proceedings, because this, unfortunately, and there is a scholarship that has done a study on this, is becoming apparently a bit more doubt this than it should be, especially given now a stronger link between the President of the Commission and the European Parliament and the elections. And, you know, the need to be endorsed also by national political leaders. So I was wondering whether you had any thoughts, because I think in the rule of law crisis, this was a real problem. The independent role of the Commission from the political, you know, what was the political reality in the European Parliament and at national level, especially with the Fidesz.
Yes, and now, unlike 10 or 20 years ago, commissioners sometimes go public expressing their pride in having, with a decision, favored their country of origin. This would have been totally inconceivable some time ago. So, going back to the European Council is the roof of the whole edifice. Because the European Council is inherently the place of intergovernmentalism and nationalism, then it precipitates, it permeates the whole building, and it creates an acceptance of national references and national interests, even in places that would really, where that is not admissible legally, logically, and politically. And this can, in the end, erode the whole building.
Let's hope it doesn't be eroded. It's not going to be eroded. Now we have a question from Lawrence. I'm sorry, but there are lots of questions in different bits of this computer for all the speakers, and is how to rationalize the rise of populist parties in all the EU countries, and do you think that the policy making of the EU lead to the rise of populism, and which policies do you think play the largest role? It's a small question, but it's for all the panel. So I don't know if Sylvie, do you want to start?
If you ask, but no, the only remark I wanted to do is that we should have no sympathy at all for populists. I observe that many of them are nationalists and proposing very little solution, they don't propose anything for the future. But in the word populism, you have people, and we should ask ourselves why we lost the people. The European integration is the most beautiful project on earth ever. It is based on peace, on solidarity, on cooperation, of respect of minorities, of whatever. With this kind of product, if we were in a company, why would we lose our clients? And this is exactly the question I ask myself. I include myself and the people who may bear a responsibility for that. It's quite difficult to find against people who sometimes simply lie, oversimplify, don't tell the truth on the real state of the world, etc. But I think we should go back to the roots of the problem I mentioned before. And by the way, I did not use the word democratic deficit, because this is one of these words that is meaning nothing. I really believe we should look carefully at the role of the European Council, the evolution of the Commission, as you said before rightly, what can the European Parliament do? How can we really implement the treaty? The key question is that maybe we lost the citizens, and once again, the last decision on enlargement taken without any real debate in the population, without any visit of Ursula von der Leyen across the old member states when she goes regularly to Kiev, is a real problem for democracy.
Yes, Mario?
Yes, Sylvie, we lost the citizens where we is the European Union, but we lost the citizens, whoever is we, also politics at the national level. So we belong to a system which is self-fed by the national and the community level, where politics is conducted in a way that is not able to solve problems, is often disgusting in its procedures. And then, of course, there might be separate responsibility between the national and the community life. But I'm afraid the problem is bigger than the European Union losing citizens.
Agreed.
Giuliano, do you have anything you would want to add?
Basically, no, Mario says the right thing. Populist policies originate inside our national contexts because they reflect a time in which those who are not populists do not discuss with people anymore. Simple like that. And the anxieties of people remained unanswered except for the populists who say, I stand on your side and I'm against your enemies, those who come from abroad, from are spoiling you or something, either your values or your job or whatever. This has to do with the national political context. The populists win because there is nobody else nowadays that still cope with this new challenge by convincing people that these populists are not giving answers to their problems, but only echo, only more voice. In this kind of system, the European level is by itself an answer, because populists tend to say we can do better inside our borders. We can do better standing alone. We can do better without waiving our national prerogatives. And then when they have to do with migration, what do they ask for? More Europe. More European intervention. The problems that can't find a solution at the national level, for which even the populists are forced to go to Brussels and find a common solution, are a sort of antidote, but an antidote that will not succeed as long as the national political contexts remain what they are. As long as my main goal is to give my national interests the best answer, whatever the role for the others. So again, it's not a European problem as such. Europe resents of a national problem that at the moment is without solution.
No, but may I just add something? I fully agree with what both speakers said on the fact that when I meant we, is it that there is also a responsibility at national level when they pretend that Europe is the solution, to give Europe the necessary means to act. A budget, even a limited one, but a real budget adopted with transparency. We could have had transnational lists in order to have a European Parliament which is not just designated indirectly by the national parties, etc., etc. So my problem is not that the people at national level don't want to build Europe is that they don't build Europe while pretending that they want to rely on Europe for the most vital threat we are facing.
May I give an example? The Green Deal. The Green Deal 5 years ago shaped necessary measures for our future, for our life in the future. And it was immediately written by the Commission, already in the communication to the Parliament of December 2019, that these measures needed an explanation to the citizens, needed to be discussed, needed national politicians, the member states, the Commission said, to convince people of the need to accept limitations, etc. On the other side, there were incentives, financial supports, etc. Nothing has been done at the national level in these 5 years. And as soon as detractors moved, because the categories that were affected by the measures realized what these measures were about, everybody went back and the populace said, "We are with you. We are with you." So where the others? The others that don't proclaim politics but convince people that policies are needed. They existed decades ago. Almighty God has spoiled us of this kind of politicians, and there is nothing we can do.
Thank you very much. On this not very happy note, we must bring the proceedings to the close, although one last comment is let's not pretend that the populists are only the fault of the national level, because our Commission President has reacted to certain narratives both on migration and on the Green Deal in a way that is not entirely persuasive to some of us. Let's put it like this. But I really would like to thank our speakers. I think this was a tremendous start to our webinar program. And yes, please do sign up. I think in the chat there is the address to sign up to our newsletter. But really, I would like to thank Mario Monti, Sylvie Goulard, and Giuliano Amato for such insightful contributions, and all the participants for partaking to this event. And I'm sorry we couldn't go on. We cannot go on with our discussion. There are lots of questions still. Thank you very much, and bye-bye.
Thank you, Eleanor. Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye-bye.